Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robb followed the giant twins through the camp towards an area that was mostly green and gold, the colors of House Tyrell. Even though Robb and his companions had joked about how unfit some of the men looked for war, there were some groups that the Northern King saw that looked like they were preparing for battle. The warriors owed loyalty to some of the more powerful houses in the Reach: House Hightower, House Rowan, House Tarly, and House Redwine. The one group that impressed Robb the most were the men bearing the sigil of House Tarly, of Horn Hill. These men were constantly drilling and were the most disciplined group of soldiers Robb had ever seen. It's said that the best warriors came from Horn Hill, a place that bred fighters. This rumor was made all the more true when one considered who commanded these men. Randyll Tarly was highly regarded as one of the best fighters and commanders in all of Westeros, the only man to defeat Robert Baratheon during his rebellion. Lady Olenna is just inside, one of the giants said, shaking Robb from his thoughts. The tent was nearly as elaborate as Renly's, a mass of green and golden roses. Robb ducked inside, a hand falling to his sword. The interior of the tent was well decorated and comfortable, with an obvious design of golden roses and green. A brazier glowed in the corner, filling the room with warmth. Just as with Renly's, food and wine seemed to be abundant. "Oh, no need for that, my lord. I assure you I am no threat," a voice tutted from the side of the room. Robb turned to see an old woman sitting alone at a table, a platter of cheese and fruit in front of her. She was small, really the size of a child, with white hair and a wizened face. A cane was leaning against the table within easy reach of her spotted hand. She patted the chair next to her. "Come, sit," she ordered, popping a date in her mouth. Robb raised an eyebrow, but took the proffered seat. "Thank you," he said slowly. "I take it you are Lady Olenna." The woman's smile was unique to Robb. It was innocent, but at the same time mischievous, like there was an inside joke between the old woman and Robb that only she knew. "I am. And you are Robb Stark, the king in the north," she said with a mock growl when saying Robb's title. "I say, it has been many years since I have met a Stark. You don't look much like one." Robb frowned. "I take after my mother, but that makes me no less a Stark, my lady," he answered stiffly. Winter runs through your veins. It's not hard to see," the old woman said, shrugging. Glancing down at Grey Wind, who had laid down next to Robb's seat, "As is the giant wolf by your side," she clasped her hands in front of her, a regretful expression on her face. "It's a tragedy what happened to Ned Stark. He was a good man." Robb raised an eyebrow. "You knew him?" Olenna shook her head. "I can't say I knew him well. I've only ever seen him once, during the tourney at Harrenhal. He was a serious boy, much different from his brash older brother and passionate sister. From what I heard, it seemed like the years had not changed that," she explained, putting her hands back in her lap. "However, what cannot be disputed was that late Lord Stark was a man of honor." Robb gave the woman a brief, grateful smile. "He was," he said. "I assume you asked me here to do more than offer your condolences." Lady Olenna laughed. "My word, you certainly are a Northman. No time for southern pleasantries." She popped another date in her mouth, looking at Robb with shrewd interest as she chewed. "I understand you are looking to ally with us. I wanted to know the kind of man we might ally with," she explained. "I must say you have shocked us all, Robb Stark. Even Tarly's impressed. You are winning the war. Why come to us?" "The war would be over sooner if Renly would get a move on. He's wasting time," Robb answered bitterly. Lady Olenna sighed. "We agree on that matter. Renly has been ignoring his council's advice, spending his time with tourneys and feasts instead of planning for war," she admitted. "Not that my son has any problem with that." Robb looked at her. "Why? He has the manpower to easily sweep away all competitors. Why does he not see this?" Lady Olenna shook her head. "I wish I had an answer for you. From what my granddaughter has told me, Renly believes that you and Tywin will tear each other apart, leaving him to walk in and claim the throne himself." She then leaned forward slightly. "Unless you have any plans about that." Robb scoffed. "I told Renly that my offer is on the table until tomorrow night. If he doesn't take it, then I will deal with Tywin and Joffrey myself." Lady Olenna raised her eyebrow at the iron in Robb's voice. "And what are your terms?" "I don't want the Iron Throne, Renly, or whoever takes it can have it. All I want is what was taken from my family back. Robb explained, once I have those, then the North and Riverlands will become independent from the Iron Throne. Lady Olenna raised an eyebrow, impressed. She nodded to the crown sitting on Robb's head. You mean to keep your kingship? Robb nodded. My men have declared me king of the North. I cannot and will not take their oaths of loyalty and sell them. But your men did not proclaim you king of the Riverlands. Lady Olenna pointed out. The Riverland lords kneel just as the Northern lords did. That means I'm their king too. Robb replied with a shrug. Their conversation was interrupted when Lady Margaery, Renly's wife, slipped into the tent. She looked up in surprise when she saw Robb, instantly dropping into a curtsy. I am sorry, King Robb. I did not know you were present. She apologized. She made to leave, but Robb caught her before she could. It's quite all right, my lady. Your grandmother and I were just talking, Robb said easily, getting up to pull out a chair for her. Please, you may join us if you wish. Margaery smiled and took the seat. Robb pushed her back in and returned to his seat. I hope my grandmother has not scared you too much, Margaery said with a slight smile, plucking a grape from the vine. Robb grinned easily. No, not yet. Their conversation was brought to an abrupt halt when Grey Wind also decided to introduce himself to Margaery. The giant wolf padded forward, pushing his nose onto Margaery's lap, sniffing her hands in person, looking up at her with curious golden eyes. Margaery gasped, leaning back slightly, obviously scared of the wolf. Robb snapped his fingers. Down, Grey Wind, he ordered. The wolf sat back on its haunches but did not leave his spot in front of Margaery. The young queen laid a hand on her lap slowly, allowing Grey Wind to lean forward and sniff her. When she passed the wolf's test, he pushed his head under her hand. Margaery laughed, relieved, and began to run her hand through the wolf's fur, marveling at the fact that she was petting a real dire wolf. He's magnificent, she breathed. He's a big puppy when he wants, Robb said with a soft chuckle. But he's quite a sight in battle, scared more than a few Lannister horses, and the knights on them. Margaery nodded. I can imagine. My brother Willis breeds hounds, but none of them compare to your wolf. There's none like him south of the wall, Robb pointed out. Besides his littermates, of course. There are others, Margaery asked. Robb nodded. All my siblings have one, including Jon, my natural-born brother. Are they like... Margaery began to ask, then realizing she didn't know the wolf's name. Grey Wind, Robb helped. I would imagine so. I saw my brother Jon before I came south, and Ghost was just as large as his brother here. Where are the others? Margaery pressed. Ghost is with Jon in Riverrun, Summer and Shaggy Dog are with my youngest brothers in Winterfell, and Nymeria and Lady I have no clue. They belong to my sisters, Arya and Sansa, Robb answered. How big do they grow to be? Bigger than ponies, or so the Maester of Winterfell tells my brother, Robb responded with a laugh. Lord Stark and I were talking about his conversation with Renly, Lady Olenna said, bringing the conversation back on track. I trust your talk with my husband went well? Margaery asked, becoming a bit more businesslike, although she kept one hand petting Grey Wind at all times. Robb noticed the little shift Margaery made in her attitude. She was going to take their discussion seriously and not make stupid comments, much like her grandmother hasn't. He looked closely at her, noting the intelligence that she hid rather well in her eyes. She was certainly more than a pretty face. I did not get the answer I hoped for, but I will get it tomorrow night no matter what, Robb answered honestly. I have given Renly a deadline. I will have my answer by tomorrow night, and if I do not receive one, then I leave regardless, the next morning. Margaery raised an eyebrow. Why so soon? I've been away from my men for too long, Robb replied firmly. I am fighting a war, my lady. Surely you have commanders who can lead your army for you, Margaery questioned. I left my men under the direction of my great-uncle, the Blackfish, a fine commander of men, but they are my men. I should be leading them, Robb replied. Margaery nodded, glancing at her grandmother for a moment before bringing her gaze back to Robb. I have heard many interesting things about the North from my brother and father, but have never actually met a Northerner, she said thoughtfully. You're not at all what I imagined. Robb smiled slightly. I hope that is a compliment, my lady, he said with a chuckle. Though now I am curious. What did you imagine? Margaery hesitated. I thought Northerners were more barbaric, she admitted. Your companion, Small John, you called him, is what I imagined. Though the man was anything but small, Lady Olenna commented dryly. Robb laughed. We call him Small John because his father is the Great John, and both are probably closer to what you think is a stereotypical northerner, he explained easily. Do you find me barbaric, my lady? Marjorie shook her head slightly. Not at all, my lord, she replied quietly. Robb smiled. We northerners are just different is all. We have no time for fancy language when there is a harvest to collect and firewood to cut. The words of my house are winter is coming, and we in the north must always be ready. A fine lesson, Lady Olenna complimented. My dear, you said your father and brother told you this? Marjorie nodded. Yes, grandmother. Lady Olenna scoffed. Forgive my family, Lord Stark. My son and youngest grandson are quite foolish, and speak without thinking. Robb waves aside the apology. Think nothing of it. I have heard worse. There are those who believe that I changed into a great grey direwolf, and snapped up the Kingslayer with one monstrous bite. Marjorie giggled, causing both Robb and Olenna to look towards her. Forgive me, my lord, that is also something that my father mentioned. If that is what your father believes, then I am sorry if I fall short of the mark. Robb chuckled. The Northern King rose to his feet, Grey Wind instantly at his side. How bowed to both Marjorie and Olenna. Thank you, my ladies, for your company. As enjoyable as it was, I am afraid I must return to my friends. I would hate for them to worry. Marjorie smiled, looking at the same time a little sad that Grey Wind had walked away. Of course, my lord. We appreciate your time. Hopefully we speak again. Robb grinned. I hope so as well, he said, bowing once more before he strode out. Grey Wind looked once more at Marjorie before following his master. Line break. Marjorie. After the Northern King left, her grandmother bit into a piece of cheese and chewed thoughtfully. He likes you quite a bit, my dear, she commented casually, watching to see how her granddaughter reacted. Marjorie shrugged, pouring herself wine and cradling the glass in her hand. It's not like that matters, she replied, not hiding the bitterness in her voice. It might, Olenna said. He's young, handsome, successful, and the most eligible man in Westeros. I raise my glass to whatever lucky girl gets him, Marjorie said, taking a drink of wine. The Rose of Highgarden was not happy in her marriage, although many who saw the royal couple would beg to differ. They played their parts very well, Renly the charming king and Marjorie his dutiful queen, but away from prying eyes the marriage was nothing more than two strangers, who didn't even sleep in the same bed. Renly was everything Robb was in appearance. Tall, muscular, handsome, well-spoken, and charming. There were two distinct differences between the two men. The first was that Robb was a warrior. He had fought in battle and earned his spurs. Renly had not. The youngest Baratheon did not care for war, only the power that it would bring him. That's why he had men like Randyll Tarly, Mathis Rowan, and Bryce Caron. They would lead his army and he would take glory for the victories. The second difference between the two men, and perhaps the most important, was that Renly was not exactly attracted to the fairer sex. He loved a Tyrell, but not Marjorie. No, Renly's love and affection belonged to Marjorie's brother Loras, who had been Renly's squire and secret lover for years. All of Loras's family knew, but they knew that he was happy with Renly, and chose to never say anything. Now his love had trapped House Tyrell to Renly's cause. Robb Stark was everything Marjorie had hoped Renly would be. He was charming and gentlemanly, with a masculine nature that wasn't overbearing. He also didn't seem to mind discussing important matters with women, something he had just displayed not a few minutes ago. He was also quite handsome, with curly auburn hair, deep blue eyes, and a rugged handsomeness paired with a natural confidence that made girls want to throw themselves at the young man. Olenna noticed the look in her granddaughter's eye. She had seen it from time to time whenever a passing minstrel or knight visited Highgarden. You fancy him? Marjorie hesitated, but nodded. I do, she admitted gently, tapping her finger repeatedly against her glass. Olenna shook her head sadly. You are married, my dear, and we have made our bed with Renly Baratheon. Now we must lie in it. He will not lie next to me, Marjorie joked, but I see your point. Olenna looked at her granddaughter. She had not intended to put her into a loveless marriage. Olenna's own husband hadn't been exactly the sharpest sword in the armory, but he was actually attracted to her. I want you to get close to Robb Stark, Olenna said finally. Marjorie raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. For what purpose? Robb Stark does not intend to lose this war, Olenna explained. It might prove advantageous to build a good relationship with him. Do not forget the North and the Riverlands are not the only kingdoms in Westeros who are angered by the passing of Eddard Stark. The man was loved in the Vale as well. But the Vale hasn't joined with the Riverlands or the North, Margaery pointed out. Olenna pursed her lips. A curious situation to be sure, but there is a very good chance that they will in time. Margaery nodded. I will do as you ask. Olenna smirking. I have no doubt of that, my dear, and I'm sure you'll have some fun with that. After a few weeks with Renly, I bet it'll be nice to have a man pay attention to you. Margaery laughed. Robb Stark is just a friend, grandmother. Olenna nodded to her protégé. That's my girl. Robb. I am surprised, Lord Stark, to find you at my brother's side. Stannis Baratheon scolded, speaking to Robb like he was a child. It is well known that your father was a supporter of my claim. Stannis was similar to Renly and yet vastly different at the same time. They both were tall and muscular, with coal-black hair and blue eyes. And that's where the similarities end. Stannis had wispy black hair across his head, and a close-cropped beard across his jaw. His face seemed stretched with his hollow cheeks and thin lips, probably due to how much the man ground his teeth. The man had the presence of an experienced commander, but did not dress like the nobleman he was. He wore a plain ash-gray woolen shirt, under his studded jerkin, plain old boots, and a plain belt that held his war dagger and sword. I am not my father, Robb said angrily. As you know, he died defending your cause. Yes, I heard. Stannis without an ounce of sympathy. But there are sacrifices that have to be made. My father is not some pawn to be cast aside in your play for power, Robb growled. He died an unlawful death supporting you. Understand if I do not mean to do the same. I don't understand. Stannis barked back. I am the true king of Westeros. By all the laws of men and gods that is true, even if all of Westeros is set against me. Renly chuckled. You never knew what it meant to be king, even now you prove that. You will never be loved by Westeros. Stannis glared at his brother before glancing at his sigil. You changed our family banner. Renly smirked. I can see you've done the same, he said, nodding toward Stannis's banner, a stag's head emblazoned on a heart that was on fire. Why is your stag on fire? Your brother has taken the fiery heart of the Lord of Light as his banner, the strange woman at Stannis's side explained. She was an exotic beauty, with hair like burnished copper, red eyes and pale, flawless skin. She had a lithe figure with full breasts, a narrow waist, and a heart-shaped face. She regarded Renly and his party with a look of arrogance and amusement. Ah, you must be the fire priestess I've heard so much about, Renly said. I must say, brother, when I heard you had found religion, I was surprised. It makes much more sense now. Watch yourself, Renly, Stannis warned. Renly grinned. No, I am relieved you have found religion in your old age. You should kneel before you, brother, the priestess advised. He is the Lord's chosen, born amidst salt and smoke. Born amidst salt and smoke. Renly mocked. Is he a ham? That's twice I've warned you, Stannis rumbled. Robb sighed. If you two are only going to fling thinly veiled insults, then you waste my time. I called this meeting to give my brother one more chance to kneel before his lawful king, Stannis said. The Iron Throne is mine by right. All who deny that are my enemies. The whole realm denies it, from the Wall to Dorne, Renly replied instantly. Old men deny it on their deathbeds, and unborn children deny it in their mother's wombs. Nobody wants you as their king. You never wanted any friends, brother. And a man without friends is a man without power, Renly said, growing serious. No one wants you for their king. Stannis simply regarded Renly with grim sympathy. For the sake of the mother who bore us, I will give you till dawn to strike your banners and pledge yourself to me. You'll have a seat on the council, and I will even name you my heir until a son is born to me. Stannis offered. Defy me and be destroyed. Renly glanced towards his army. Look across that field, brother. Look at those banners. You think a few bolts of cloth will make you king? Stannis challenged. No, the men holding those bolts of cloth will make me king, Renly replied firmly. We shall see, Renly. Come the dawn we shall see, Stannis said, turning his horse around and trotting away. Look to your sins, Lord Renly. The night is dark and full of terrors, the priestess added before following her king. It's funny, Renly said, glancing at Robb. I loved him once. A line break. Robb has had enough of southern politics after watching Renly and his brother Stannis fling mud at each other for no gain. All the while the older Baratheon kept remarking that Robb's father would be disappointed that he had been declared king and was treating with Renly instead of declaring for Stannis. What worried Robb was the Red Priestess who had been by Stannis' side. She made Robb feel uneasy. There was something about her that he didn't trust. Now he was striding into a small camp in the center of Renly's, where his companions were sitting around a fire, chatting casually. Daisy looked up as Robb walked in, smiling. "How'd the meeting go?" Robb sighed in annoyance and ran a hand through his curls. "It was an hour of the brothers throwing insults at each other. A complete waste of my time." "Well, you have a guest," Darren said, jerking his head towards Robb's tent. The others tried hard to keep smiles off their faces, but it was obvious that they found something very funny about the situation. The young king raised an eyebrow and walked towards his tent, noting that Grey Wind had shot into the tent the instant Robb had walked into the campsite. Robb pushed aside the tent flap to reveal Margaery Tyrell petting Robb's direwolf, a soft smile on her face. Robb raised an eyebrow, a smile spreading across his face. "My lady," he greeted, bowing slightly. "What do I owe the pleasure?" Lady Margaery looked up, a smile also spreading across her face. "Forgive me, my lord. I just came to see your beautiful wolf again. I didn't mean to intrude," she said. She looked back down at the giant wolf, whose eyes were closed in pleasure as it received Margaery's undivided attention. "He truly is magnificent." Robb chuckled, dropping onto a nearby stool. He is. He likes you." Margaery chuckled as well. "How was the meeting with Stannis?" Robb was unable to keep the disgust off his face. "Terrible. The two brothers threw insults the entire time. It was a complete waste of time." Margaery nodded slowly. "There have been rumors that Stannis has taken up a foreign god and now has a priestess advising him. Is that true?" she asked. "There's been word that she's burned all the statues of the Seven and the Sept as well." Robb nodded. "Aye, it's true. There's something about her. I can't seem to put my finger on it." Margaery looked at him. "Do you think she is a pretender?" Robb shook his head. "I don't think she's pretending, that's what worries me." Robb said, "All my instincts tell me to be wary of her. So far my instincts have not failed me." "Stannis is not known as the zealot type," Margaery mused. "That's the other thing." Robb agreed. He looked at the beautiful girl. "Why did you come looking for me?" "I wanted to hear about the meeting with Stannis," Margaery replied immediately. "Your husband was also there," Robb countered. "Now the truth, please, my lady." Margaery chuckled. "My husband has always treated me a little delicately. A rose with a stem of steel." Robb joked. "You do not have to worry about me keeping the truth from you. In the north, some of our women are a lot stronger than steel." "You mean Daisy Mormont?" Margaery said, glancing outside the tent. "Aye, and her mother and sisters as well," Robb said. "The women of Bear Island are very remarkable. So, what would you like to know?" "Is there anything from the meeting that I should know about?" Margaery asked. Robb shrugged. "Stannis isn't pleased. He sees me and Renly as traitors and false claimants to his throne. His priestess proclaimed him the Lord's chosen. He's bought into the religion." Margaery mused. "He's changed his banner. He has the priestess, but he was still Stannis, the man who held out against the might of the Reach." Robb sighed. "I will be watching him very closely, regardless of what Renly says tonight." Margaery's face shifted in an instant, her thoughtful look replaced with sorrow. "You leave tonight?" Robb nodded. "I will meet with Renly tonight, and hopefully receive my answer. I leave tomorrow morning, regardless." Margaery looked at him. "Do you believe my husband will agree to your terms?" Robb shrugged. "I don't know," he admitted. "If he agrees, then we can end this war sooner, and I can go back to Winterfell with my family and stay there." Margaery pouted. "Do you hate the South so much?" "The South is just different, my lady. There are some parts that I like," Robb said easily, gazing into her large brown eyes. "But it's not somewhere I would like to remain for long. Starks don't prosper in the South. You know how Robert's rebellion." Margaery nodded and stood up, patting Grey Wind lovingly. "Thank you for talking with me, Lord Stark. I hope your talk with my husband goes well," she said, not able to meet his eyes. Robb nodded sadly. "Thank you for your company, my lady. Do you need an escort back to your tent?" She shook her head. "No, I have my husband's guards waiting for me. I will be okay," she promised. She looked once more at Robb, before quickly ducking under the tent opening and leaving. Greywind whined sadly, slumping next to Robb's cot. Robb nodded. I know, boy, I miss her already too. Line break. So, what was the girl here for? Small John asked curiously, digging into his fourth bowl of swine stew. Robb and his guard were sat around a low fire, eating an early dinner before Robb met with Renly. Renly's steward, a lanky man by the name of Nathan, had been kind enough to send food for breakfast, lunch, and supper for the northern guards. Tonight it was a stew of boiled pork and vegetables accompanied with some crusty bread and black beer, at Small John's request. She just wanted to talk, Robb replied, slathering the last of his bread with butter before tearing into it, following the bread with more beer. Based on her dress, are you sure, Your Grace? Daeron asked with a sly smile. Robb pushed the heir to Hornwood slightly with his boot, forcing the man off his stump and onto the hard-packed dirt. Both young men had smiles on their faces. We talked, that's it, Reb reiterated. She was curious about the meeting with Stannis. Her bloody husband was there, Small John pointed out. My thoughts exactly, but it seems Margaery is seen more like a delicate rose than a queen with a crown. So she came to you for answers? Daisy asked. Robb nodded. She did. You met this girl yesterday, Daeron commented. Robb shrugged. I like to believe that we're friends. Besides, you've seen her. Will you look me in the eye and say you wouldn't want to be friends with her? Daeron smirked. I'd love to be friends in bed with her. Once more Daeron was pushed off his stump. Say one more thing about Lady Margaery, and I'm pushing you into the fire. Robb joked with mock seriousness. I'll just bash your head in, Daisy deadpanned. Daeron glanced at the lanky but muscular woman and the studded mace she had near her hand, gulping slightly. I'll keep quiet. Small John clapped Daeron on the shoulder. Wise choice, my friend. I've seen many a man get on Daisy's bad side, and I've seen all walk away with either a broken nose or their balls turned inside out. Or both, Daisy grumbled, draining the last of her ale. Your Grace, are you sure you want to leave so early? We could stay a few more days. There is no harm talking with Renly. Robb shook his head, thinking back on what Lord Bracken had said. I can't go back now, Daisy, he answered. I said I would leave tomorrow, and that's what I intend to do. We are in Renly's camp, which means he holds most of the leverage. I had to take command of the situation any way I could, and that was by giving him an ultimatum. So, if he rejects your terms, you'll take the Iron Throne? Daeron asked curiously, no longer smiling or joking. Robb put down his tankard and rested his elbows on his knees. I'm not sure, he admitted. I think I may have to. After today there's no way I can declare for Stannis. Something not right there. So you'll take the throne and sell it off to the highest bidder? Small John grunted. Not a bad idea. Robb shook his head. I can't auction off the Iron Throne. I have to make sure it goes to someone who won't abuse its power. Who? Daisy asked. Who do you know in the Seven Kingdoms capable of ruling 5 other realms? Robb resisted the urge to say Jon. His brother would be great on the throne, especially because he wanted nothing to do with it. He would see kingship as Robb sees it, a burden, not a privilege. It also helped that Jon was technically the true heir to the Iron Throne. I don't know, Robb said finally. We'll deal with that later. First we have to beat Tywin Lannister. And having 100,000 bloody men marching towards King's Landing would make that much easier. Will it? Small John wondered. Would Tywin really turn his back on us if Renly marched towards King's Landing? A snake won't sit still while a knife is heading towards its heart, Robb said confidently. Tywin will not sit idle at Harrenhal while his grandson and daughter are attacked. That is when we will strike. What if Renly does agree to your terms, but refuses to give back your sisters or ice? What then? Daisy asked. Robb sighed. There are many unknowns. Too many for my liking. I don't trust Renly, and I trust Stannis less, but I need one to help me win this damn thing. I'm taking a risk here. How do you know if it's the right one? Daeron asked. I'll just have to wait and see, Robb replied grimly. Robb X, one of Renly's Rainbow Guard, arrived at sunset to collect Robb. The Rainbow Guard was Renly's version of the King's Guard, where each knight wore a cape bearing a different color of the rainbow. There was Ser Robar the red, Bryce Caron the orange, Ser Aemon the yellow, Ser Gaillard the green, Brienne the blue, Ser Parman the purple, and Ser Loras was the Lord Commander. The Northern King was skeptical of the group. Brienne and Bryce Caron were not Robb's worry, as the Lord of Nightsong looked old enough to have fought in the Greyjoy Rebellion, and Brienne had put her skills on display when the Northern warriors had first arrived in the camp. Other than those two, all the others were said to be great tourney knights. But war wasn't a tourney. When you get knocked down, you don't get back up. Sir Robar was who Renly sent to collect Robb. Robar was the second son of Jon Royce, the Lord of Runstone. Robb vaguely remembered the man known as Bronze Jon when he had visited Winterfell as he made his way north to bring his son Waymar to the wall. His father had always spoken highly of Lord Royce, both as a warrior and man. His son Robar seemed to take after his father in both regards. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with well-trimmed brown hair and pale eyes. The silver armor he wore was filigreed in bronze, with runes of the First Men, slightly contrasting with the red cape that trailed his every step. When he spoke, he sounded sincere and casual. "Any news from your father?" Robb asked, trying to make conversation. Robert's face fell slightly as he shook his head. "Lady Lysa is keeping the Vale locked up tight, not allowing any ravens in or out," he said sadly. "The last thing I heard from my father was that he would try to reason with Lady Arryn in favor of joining the war and saving Ned Stark. It seems that his words had little success. I applaud your father's dedication to his friendship to my father, but I'm not sure how much the forces of the Vale would have helped. Looking back now, Joffrey is a cruel, foolish bastard. I wouldn't put it past him to kill my father out of spite, rather than any real want for justice." Robb said grimly, "If it makes any consolation to you, Sir Robar, I am glad to have you part of this war. House Rose has always been praised by my father. If there ever comes a time where you are in need of someone to serve, I would be more than happy to have you." Robar smiled. "Maybe one day we'll drink and swap war stories in the halls of King's Landing when Renly claims the throne." Robb smiled as well. "Or maybe one day you can travel up to Winterfell and I can show you how we Northerners feast." The two young men shared a laugh, a rare thing in war. The friendship between their fathers and mutual respect for each other allowed them to become fast friends. If there was ever a kingdom that could relate to Northmen, it was the Vale. Their ideals like honor and loyalty ran deep, just like the North. "What do you think about the Rainbow Guard, my lord?" Robar asked curiously. "I hear you keep a guard of your own?" "I do," Robb answered. "My battle guard, young nobles like myself who are trying to prove themselves in war. I would say that we are a group of friends rather than a king and his guard. As for the Rainbow Guard, I am rather skeptical." Robar raised an eyebrow. "Oh? I mean no offense, but most of you have not fought in battle. You are great in tournaments, but the two are not the same," Robb explained plainly. "The King's Guard are said to be the best knights in the realm. I hate the Kingslayer, but I cannot say that he is not one of the deadliest knights in the kingdom." Robb nodded slowly. "I see what you mean, my lord." Just before they reached Renly's tent, Robb stopped and looked at the red-cloaked man. "Sir Robar, our fathers are friends, and I do not wish to create bad blood between us. You asked me a question, and I have answered." Robar nodded again. "I understand, my lord. I thank you for your honesty. Hopefully if all goes well tonight I can show the warrior I am in battle." Robb was about to respond when Brienne, who was standing guard outside, interrupted the conversation. The giant woman was armored in blue-tinted steel plate with a blue cape hanging from her shoulders. "His Grace is inside, Lord Stark," the giant woman stated. Robb nodded. "Thank you, my lady." He turned back to Robert. "Until we share wine in King's Landing." "Or in Winterfell, my lord," Robar replied. Line break. Robb stepped into the tent, which was now warmly glowing thanks to a brazier and many candles. Renly was still dressed in his armor, standing at his desk as he read reports. He looked up when Robb entered, smiling. "Ah, Robb, I see you're back to hear my decision." Robb nodded. I am," he answered simply. He wasn't here to beat around the bush or exchange false compliments. He wanted an answer, and he wanted it now. Renly nodded slowly. "I must say I am sorry for the way my brother acted today. I was not expecting what we saw today. I guess religion can reach every man, even the icicle that is my brother." Robb frowned. "I want an answer, Renly," Robb said, not hiding the fact that he was becoming annoyed. Renly glanced at him as if he was a small boy talking back to his father. "You know your father was much the same way, ignorant of the ways we do things in the South. He thought if he came down here, tried to pass off his aggressive northern style of negotiating, that he would last long. He did." Robb's hand fell dangerously to the hilt of claw. Do not insult my father Renly. He saved your life. Don't forget that. Renly waved aside his anger. You want the truth, Robb? You must be ready to hear it. Your father tried to bull his way through the sycophants and lickspittles of King's Landing. Eventually he got lost in it all and was stabbed so many times. He died where he was. Do not be the bull, Robb. Renly and Robb glared at each other. The king in the south versus the king in the north. One was older and politically motivated while the other was younger and driven by justice. Robb breathed deeply, reining in his temper. When he was sure he could talk calmly, he spoke again. My apologies, Renly, but you must understand, I have been away from my men for too long. I want to win this war, just like you. That is why I am here. I believe that together, we can win. We can beat the Lannisters, and we can beat Joffrey. I already told you. The Iron Throne is yours. I want nothing to do with it. Renly looked at Robb. What will you do if we win? I will take Joffrey's head, Robb said firmly. Then I will bring my sisters, my father's bones, and my family sword back to Winterfell. The North and the Riverlands will secede from the Seven Kingdoms, and I will rule as king from Winterfell. And you won't come south again, Renly said. Not unless I have to, Robb answered. What about the Westerlands? Renly asked curiously. I understand you sent men there. I did, Robb said. The lords of the Riverlands wanted revenge for what the mountain has done. Will it be part of your kingdom? Robb shrugged. Don't rightly know yet. That can be discussed at a later date, don't you think? Renly nodded, stroking his finely trimmed beard. Well, Robb, he started to say. I think he was cut off when an angry wind blew through the tent. Robb's hand instantly went to his sword, half drawing it in one motion. The candles in the tent flickered and wavered, in some cases going out, casting uneven shadows across the tent. Renly was confused as he looked around the tent. Robb was doing the same when he saw something rise from behind Renly. A shadowy black being that looked vaguely like Stannis Baratheon. Renly, Robb shouted, rushing towards him. Renly turned and let out a surprised grunt as his body went limp. Robb could see the tip of a smoky blade sticking out his back, cutting through Renly's armor like it was nothing. It was at that moment Brienne and Robbar entered the tent, their swords drawn, their eyes instantly drawn to the shadow figure and the limp form of Renly. Brienne let out a guttural cry as she rushed the being, tears streaming from her face. But as large as she was batted away as if she weighed nothing. Robbar tried his luck next, swinging his blade at a vicious arc at the creature, but his sword just passed through the being as if it was never there. Robbar was then thrown aside as well. Both of Renly's protectors had been dispatched by the Shadow Demon, leaving Robb alone with the damn thing. Robb had felt fear before, but nothing like this. Not even when the Kingslayer had carved a path through Robb's men trying to kill him. Jaime Lannister had been a living being, this thing wasn't. Robb ripped claw from its scabbard and charged the demon. Like with Robber and Brienne, it tried to swat Robb aside, but the northern warrior was ready. He ducked under the shadowy arm and brought his sword up, cutting the demon from right hip to left shoulder. The smoky being let out a silent scream that broke every glass in the tent before it exploded, sending Robb flying back. The Northern King landed heavily on the desk that held Renly's reports, breaking it in two. As he was losing consciousness, he vaguely saw Sir Loras and a dozen Tyrell guardsmen burst into the tent with their swords drawn. Loras went red with anger and grief when he saw the dead body of his lover. He pointed his blade at the slowly rising Brienne and Robbar, ordering their arrests. Before Robb could say anything, he slipped into darkness. Line break. Where am I? Robb wondered aloud, looking around at the shadow that surrounded him. He looked down at himself. He still wore his northern armor and had claw at his side. He then reached up, feeling the cold metal of his crown. The only thing he felt was a slight discomfort in his back. Somewhere you shouldn't be. Not for a long time, a voice said from the darkness. Robb looked up, not recognizing the voice. His hand had drifted to claw, looking around at the darkness. Who goes there? The voice laughed, a deep, throaty chuckle that boomed all around the Northern King. I mean you no harm, young wolf. Show yourself, Robb demanded. From the shadows in front of Robb emerged a man who looked very much like a Stark. He had dark brown hair, stone-gray eyes, and a long, hard face. His hair fell in loose curls, and the man had a rough beard that covered his jaw. In his hands was a massive greatsword that he leaned against one shoulder while a giant wolf, nearly the same height as the man sat next to him. On his head was a crown almost identical to the one Robb wore now. "Hello, Robb," the man said with a small smile. "I am Tyrion Stark." Robb was speechless. Tyrion Stark was the last king in the north before he gave up his crown to Aegon the Conqueror, earning him the title of the king who knelt. He had died over 200 years ago. "Am I dead?" Tyrion Stark laughed again. "No, lad. You are not dead. Hopefully, once this meeting is over, you will live a long and adventurous life." The man's face grew a little more serious. "I asked to see you." "Asked to see me? Why?" Robb asked. "Because there are things you should know, Robb," the man explained. "The first is this. After the long night, direwolves and the Stark kings have always been close friends. Bane here was as much a symbol of my kingship as my crown. There was a prophecy that, when direwolves and Starks came together again, the era northern kings would soon follow." Robb looked at the massive direwolf before back at the dead Stark. "So when I found that dead direwolf..." Tyrion nodded. "You started the prophecy that would ultimately put a crown on your head. So the myths about ancient Stark kings having direwolves, those were all true?" Robb asked. "They were," Tyrion answered. "When I knelt before the Targaryen, Bane vanished that night. He and all the others." Robb nodded, still trying to wrap his head around it all. "All right, I think that makes sense," he said. "Is there anything else I should know?" "There are many things I wish I could share with you, Robb. Unfortunately, I am rather limited," Tyrion said. "No man may mess with destiny, not even a dead one." "Limited?" Robb asked. "What are you talking about? How are we even talking?" Tyrion gestured to the darkness around them. "What you see is darkness," he explained. "I see something different, something indescribably to the living. All I can say is that this is the realm of the old gods." "The old gods?" Robb breathed. Tyrion nodded. "Aye, the old gods. They are the reason you and I are talking." Thunder boomed in the distance, causing the dead Stark to frown sadly. "That's my warning. As I said, I am limited with the information I can give, and we do not have long. No more questions and listen to what I have to say." Robb nodded. "I have explained our connection to direwolves. The second thing is this. You have more allies than you realize. Continue to be you, Robb Stark, and remember your friends. You will need them when the time comes." Finally, Tyrion went to say before hesitating. "What?" Robb asked. "That is all I can tell you," the ghost said sadly. "I wish I could tell you more, but I can't." As Tyrion spoke, his image began to fade, his voice slowly growing softer, just before he disappeared completely. "Do not tell anyone we had this discussion, Robb Stark. They will not believe you, but do not forget what was said," Tyrion warned before he was gone. With that, Robb was once again left alone in the darkness, thoughts and questions swirling like a sea storm in his head. What allies had his ancestor been talking about? Why could he not tell anyone about their discussion? What all had he left out? While Robb was still thinking these things, he felt his eyes grow heavy and begin to close, his body suddenly light as he once again fell back into unconsciousness. "Tyrion, what is the meaning of this?" Tyrion demanded as he walked into the throne room, Bronn at his side. At the foot of the throne, Sir Trant of the Kingsguard stood over a beaten and half-naked Sansa Stark while Joffrey stood in front of the throne, the crossbow in his hands pointed at the girl. Off to the side, the small council watched silently as their king abused the Stark girl. "What kind of knight beats a helpless girl?" Tyrion growled, glaring at Sir Meryn. "One who serves his king, imp," Sir Meryn replied angrily. "Careful now," Bronn threatened, though his tone was anything but. "We don't want to get blood all over that pretty white cloak." "Someone get something to cover herself with," Tyrion ordered, still walking towards Joffrey. "She is to be your queen. Have you no regard for her honor?" "I was punishing her," Joffrey said, defending himself. "For what crimes?" Tyrion demanded. "She can't fight her brother's battles, you half-wit." Sandor Clegane, otherwise known as the Hound, stepped forward and placed his white cloak over the Stark girl, who pulled it closer around her. She was still weeping softly from the abuse she had received only moments ago. "You can't talk to me like that. The king can do as he likes." Joffrey screamed as he sat on the throne. "The Mad King did as he liked," Tyrion countered, taking a few steps up towards the throne. "Has your uncle Jaime ever told you what happened to him?" "No one threatened his grace in the presence of the Kingsguard," Trant growled, stepping towards Tyrion, a hand falling to his sword. I am not threatening the king, sir. I am educating my nephew, Tyrion explained. Bronn, next time Ser Meryn speaks, kill him. Ser Meryn looked at the sellsword, who merely had an amused smile on his rough face. That was a threat. See the difference? Tyrion said, scolding the knight. Tyrion stepped down away from the throne and walked slowly towards Sansa, who regarded him with tear-stained eyes. He held out a hand for her, which she took hesitantly. He led her out of the throne room, ignoring Joffrey as the boy king shot to his feet. I apologize for my nephew's behavior, he said quietly. Tell me the truth. Do you want an end to this engagement? I am loyal to King Joffrey, Sansa said, her voice neutral and emotionless. My one true love. Tyrion stopped at the entrance to the throne room as Sansa walked out, followed by her ladies-in-waiting. Lady Stark, he whispered, you may survive us yet? Bronn and Tyrion watched the girl leave. The sellsword tucked his thumbs into the front of his belt. The little king's backed up, he grunted, clogged from balls to brains. You think dipping his wick will cure what ails him? Tyrion asked curiously. There's no cure for being a cunt, Bronn replied. But the boy's at that age, and he's got nothing to do all day but pick wings off flies. Couldn't hurt to get some of the poison out. Line break. What was the point of that little charade? Tyrion asked, barging into his sister's chambers. Cersei got to her feet. Have you not heard of knocking? Tyrion waved her anger aside. Unfortunately, we must have this conversation. Your son nearly had his soon-to-be queen beat to death in front of the entire court. He wouldn't have had her killed, Cersei responded, retaking her seat. His Kingsguard had his sword ready to strike the girl down, Tyrion cried. I thought we had an agreement. You control your son while I make sure the city doesn't burn to the ground. He was making a point to our enemies, Cersei said. We pay our debts. She's a girl for fuck's sake. Tyrion shouted. What point was he trying to make? That he is not above killing young girls. He is the king of Westeros. At the very least he should act like it. Especially in front of half his court. Cersei scowled but slowly sat back down. What would you have me do? She asked. Have my son restrained? You are his mother and the queen regent, Tyrion said. Advise him against any foolish ideas like the one he just pulled. How was I supposed to know what he would do? Cersei asked. Tyrion tutted, walking over to a side table that had a pitcher of wine and 2 cups. He poured himself a glass, taking a deep draught of the purple liquid. There were many things the 2 siblings disagreed on, but one thing they shared was a great taste for wines. You are his mother, Tyrion said finally. If anyone should know what he's thinking, it's you. What have you done to hold up your end of the bargain? Cersei demanded, fed up with Tyrion speaking down to her. I got rid of Jonas Slint, Tyrion said simply. The former commander of the Gold Cloaks had been a greedy slug of a man who was deep in Baelish's coin purse. Tyrion knew that he had betrayed Ned Stark on Baelish's order, and that was all the information he needed to make his decision. Janos had been sent to the wall and Bronn had filled in as his temporary replacement. Now Jacelyn Bywater served as Lord Commander of the City Guard. He was a hard, straightforward man who had little time for fools. He would whip the watch back into shape, and hopefully weed out the corrupt while doing so. He was loyal, Cersei argued. Tyrion scoffed. He was corrupt, as is half the watch. No, Sir Jacelyn will serve far better in the man's place. Already, the protests on the streets of steel, seeds, and looms have been put down and dispersed. And the food crisis? She asked, changing the subject. I have lowered the tax on imported goods from the free cities if the ship brings food in instead of other commodities, Tyrion explained. We should have shipments of salted food, hard bread, and other things on the way. It's not much, but it should keep the masses quiet for now. You think feeding the commoners hard rations will calm them? Cersei challenged. It's better than not feeding them at all, Tyrion shot back. Do not forget, my dear sister, that both the Reach and the Riverlands are fighting us. Where do you think most of our food comes from? You lowered the tax on trading? Cersei asked, taking a different path in the conversation. How is the crown paying for the imported food? Tyrion smirked. The taxes I levied against the brothels are helping pay for the food. I also slipped the fact that the crown was taxing whores to the High Septon, who is now looking at us a little more favorable. You mended our relationship with the Faith? Cersei asked, slightly amazed. Not quite, Tyrion said, shaking his head. But it's better, especially since I also mentioned that Eddard Stark wasn't a follower of the Seven, but a pagan northerner. You have it all figured out, don't you? Cersei said bitterly, taking a drink of her wine. Always so smart. Tyrion bowed mockingly. Someone has to be. Cersei glared at him, but Tyrion held his ground. The two had played this game many times before. They were masters at it, like seasoned warriors. They each knew what the other would do, how they would react. Yet, Tyrion always managed to stay just a step ahead of his sister, much to her envy. No doubt Pycelle has sent a message to father telling him of this event. Tyrion sighed. I will do what I can to placate him, but I will not face his anger alone. If you do not take control of the boy, then I will do what I must. Is that a threat against my son? Cersei demanded. No, that is a promise to make sure our family doesn't get dragged down by the boy's stupidity, Tyrion snapped. Tyrion downed the rest of his wine before setting his cup back on the table. He grabbed the pitcher and waddled out of the room, still feeling the glare Cersei was directing at him. He and his sister would never see eye to eye. They hated each other, and they were both too far down that rabbit hole to ever turn back. The one thing they shared was their loyalty to family. Cersei took pride in her family, and the fear it put in the hearts of those around her. She used it to her advantage, using the fear as a blunt weapon that she would stab repeatedly into the heart of her opponent. Tyrion, however, thought more along the lines of his father. The Lannister family legacy hung in the balance, and both he and his father were doing all they could to keep it from crumbling. The great Lion of the Rock would hunt and kill the enemies of King Joffrey, and the imp would continue to make sure that the boy would have a city to rule from. Line break. Lord Tyrion, a shy voice said from the doorway. Tyrion looked up from his reports to catch sight of a tall, graceful young girl with lush auburn hair and striking blue eyes. She was very fair, but her looks were marred by the shiftiness in her eyes and her timid demeanor. Sansa Stark had suffered more abuse than anyone as sweet as she deserved to, no more so than at the hands of her betrothed King Joffrey. But she had so far managed to survive the Viper Pit, that is the capital, and that made her respected by Tyrion and a few others. Lady Sansa, please come in, he said, hopping off his seat and pulling out a chair for the Stark girl. Thank you for agreeing to have dinner with me. Sansa nodded to Tyrion and took the seat as Pod closed the door behind her and came forward to pour wine and distribute food. He poured 2 goblets of Arbor Gold for the two before serving good portions of roasted venison and honey-glazed vegetables to either noble. When he was done, miraculously without any screw-ups, the boy returned to his place against the wall. Your family served this the night before King Robert left Winterfell, Tyrion said, digging into the venison. I thought you might enjoy some remembrance of home. Sansa had a bitter smile on her face. Perhaps that night was not my finest, my lord. Tyrion nodded slowly. Perhaps, if I remember correctly, you ended up with food on your dress, courtesy of your sister Aira. Tyrion had been present when the youngest Stark sister had flung the food, but he had spoken with a few of the nobles who had been present, asking them for any details on the feast. Many had asked Tyrion for the reason behind the questions, and the acting hand had claimed it was for a maester in the Stormlands, who was writing a book on the life of the late King Robert. Not so that he could somehow gain a friendship with the sister of his family's current enemy. Have you heard anything about my sister? Sansa asked curiously. Tyrion shook his head. He had Bronn and the gold cloaks sweep the entire city and the surrounding countryside, but the search parties had come up empty-handed. After weeks, the girl could be anywhere. And if she was with her dancing master, then she was also well protected. Nothing as of yet, my lady, Tyrion answered. Sansa nodded slowly, looking down at her plate. For a moment she didn't speak or move, simply looked at her food. Tyrion glanced towards his squire, who was also looking confused at the Stark girl. My lady? Tyrion asked softly. Why did you ask me here, Lord Tyrion? Sansa said suddenly, looking up at the stunted man. Her voice was scared, but there was some amount of steel in it as well. Tyrion held up a hand. I do not want to harm you in any way, my lady, he said gently. I am not my nephew nor my sister. I merely wish to talk to you about your brother Robb. Tears instantly appeared in her eyes. I will not sell out my family, she said, her voice cracking. I will not do it again. Again, Tyrion asked, frowning. The queen made me do it after my father was imprisoned. Sansa whimpered, struggling to keep her composure. Tyrion cursed Cersei silently. Of course her sister would kidnap the girl's father, then force her to betray her family. It was exactly the sort of manipulative and cruel plot that Cersei would pull on an innocent and naive girl like Sansa. Is there any way we can bring your brother to the table? Tyrion pressed on, trying his best to be gentle with the topic. Sansa shook her head. If you want to get Ser Hime back, you won't take me back. Not with what I've done. Presumably not without Ice or your sister either, I suppose. Tyrion muttered in annoyance. He doesn't know about Arya? Sansa asked, catching what Tyrion had said. The acting hand shrugged. I'm not sure what your brother does and does not know. All I know is that he is doing quite well for himself, much to my father's displeasure. A proud smile briefly appeared on Sansa's face before vanishing, as she realized where she was. My lord, may I take my leave? Tyrion nodded slowly. You may. Pod, will you please escort Lady Sansa back to her chambers? He ordered. And Lady Sansa. The tall girl had gotten up and was walking towards the door when Tyrion called to her. She turned around, folding her hands in front of her, her face a neutral and emotionless mask. Yes, my lord. I am truly sorry for what happened yesterday. Tyrion apologized. You have no right to trust anything my family says or does, but I want to let you know that if you need anything, please let me know. Sansa looked a little surprised. She curtsied perfectly. Thank you, my lord. You are very kind. And with that, Sansa Stark left, escorted out by Pod. You are an enigma, Lady Sansa, Tyrion muttered to himself, propping his head on the armrest as he watched the tall girl leave. If you survive Joffrey, then there might be some hope for you yet. Jon Knox. Getting into the castle had been easy. The stolen Lannister armor had allowed the small host of men easy access into the castle. Lucas Blackwood, who was posing as the captain of the group of survivors, was immediately brought to Lady Lefford while the rest of the men were settled throughout the castle. The survivors were given soup and bread, ale and blankets. Because of the size of the false Lannister host, men were bedding down in the Great Hall. The servants' quarters and spare rooms were filled to the max. Lady Lefford had gone out of her way to ensure that the men she thought as her countrymen were made as comfortable as possible. Fortunately, Jon had been placed in the same room as Lucas Blackwood, who returned to the room soon after the food had been brought. After receiving his portion of soup, bread and ale, he sat on the ground and removed his helmet. Thank the gods that's over, he breathed, tearing into his food as soon as it was in his hands. Jon raised an eyebrow. What was Lady Lefford's response? He asked, making sure to keep his voice down. He wasn't sure how soundproof the door or walls were, and didn't want his voice being heard by unwanted ears. Lucas held up a hand, taking a deep draught of his ale. When he was done, he answered. She was sympathetic, understandably so. She had her maester send a raven to Tywin telling him of the attack. What else? Another asked. Lucas shrugged. She's going to wait and see what the old lion says before she does anything. As of right now, she ordered me to protect the castle, he said before a mischievous grin came across his face. I told her that Robb Stark and his wolf wreaked havoc during the battle. I described in great detail how the king in the north had become a wolf himself, as big as a horse. Jon frowned, but Robb wasn't with us. Lucas nodded. Aye, but how would she know? If Tywin believes Robb is in the Westerlands, then that keeps his eyes off of what our king is doing in the Reach. Jon nodded. Good idea. Lucas nodded. Thank you. Now, the plan for tonight is simple. We all have our extra set of armor. This group will make straight for the Lord's chamber. If we capture Lady Lefford, we can force the fighting to stop and take the castle in a matter of minutes rather than hours. Lucas had already spread the Blackfish's plan to the rest of the men. Wherever they were at midnight, they would take off their Lannister armor and don tabards or leather armor, whatever they could to let it known that they were soldiers of the Riverlands. Once they had cast off the Lannister armor and connected with others in the group, then they were free to attack any Lannister soldier they saw. The young Blackwood had also made it very clear that servants and other castle staff were not to be harmed. Both he and Jon knew that Robb wouldn't sanction the unnecessary death of innocents, let alone men and women who couldn't defend themselves. How many men are here? Jon asked. About 800 men, Lucas said, taking a few more bites of his soup. The old lion left a sizable force here to try and deter us from attacking the castle. That didn't work, one soldier chuckled darkly. What did you tell her about the rest of the host? Jon asked curiously. Lucas gestured for Jon to wait as he shoved the rest of the bread in his mouth. He took a moment to chew before answering. I told her I didn't know, only that no one followed us this way, Lucas answered. It makes our job easier if the guards aren't on edge tonight. Lucas quickly finished the last of his ale, stacking his dishes and pushing them aside before he slumped a little more against the wall. That's enough talk for now. Rest, sharpen your swords, and make ready. We have a long night ahead of us. Line break. Jon and Lucas led the group through the castle, daggers drawn. They were no longer wearing the red and gold Lannister armor. Instead, Jon wore a Stark tunic while Lucas wore a tabard with his family sigil on it. Others in their group wore tabards or leather armor. Still, the clothing did its part. It made it known that these men weren't friends of the Lannisters. The first two Lannisters they encountered were too shocked to even put up a fight. Three men instantly jumped on both men, grabbing them by the shoulders and arms while the third man slit the throat. It was not a clean or honorable kill by any means. But this is what the Blackfish had meant when he said that honor had to be set aside to make sure the mission was a success. When they reached the room of Lady Lefford, the two men standing guard were quickly muffled and killed, their bodies gently put on the ground. "Is this the right one?" Jon whispered. Lucas nodded. The Riverlander was breathing a little heavily as the adrenaline from the fighting coursed through him. "This is where I met with her earlier," Lucas answered. "Now help me with this door." Together, both Jon and Lucas threw themselves against the door, sending it flying back on its hinges as the lock was broken. As soon as the door was open, Jon and Lucas grabbed their weapons and stormed the room with the rest of their group at their back. Lady Lefford sat up in her bed, her hair a mess of tangles as she scrambled to cover herself with her blankets. Her face was a mask of horror and confusion. "What's happening?" she screamed. Lucas gestured for his men to grab her. "Lady Lefford, we are taking the castle in the name of King Robb Stark, the king in the north." It was then that Lady Lefford recognized who Lucas was. Her jaw went slack. "You're who I spoke with today. You said you were a captain." Lucas smiled grimly. "I am Lucas Blackwood, my lady, second son of Lord Tydos Blackwood." Lady Lefford was dragged from her bed and was brought before Lucas and Jon, the latter watching the interaction quietly. By now the noblewoman was getting over the shock of what was happening, and her anger quickly came to the fore. "I brought you into my home, I gave you shelter, food. This is how to repay my hospitality," she screeched. Lefford's screaming seemed to get the attention of others, as three Lannister soldiers came rushing into the room, cutting down the first two men they saw. They looked as if they had dressed in a hurry before coming to the room. Their armor was mismatched, and none of them wore helms. Jon was the first to react. He threw himself at the enemy, slashing his blade through the neck of the first man before plunging Frost to the hilt in the second man. The first man dropped his sword and grabbed his throat as he tumbled to the ground, his friend falling over him, holding his stomach where his intestines were spilling out. The third man watched his two companions be cut down with ease, and was beginning to shuffle towards the door, but Lucas stopped him. The young Blackwood stepped forward, his sword taking the man in the side. He too soon joined the pile of bodies on the floor, their blood slowly spreading out over the floor. "Thank you," Jon said, nodding to Lucas. Blackwood smiled grimly. "Can't let you have all the fun," he said, turning his attention back to Lady Lefford, who had watched in horror as her would-be rescuers were cut down in a matter of moments by the two men. "To answer you, my lady, I am repaying the hospitality the Lannisters have given to my countrymen," he said grimly. "Do not speak to me as if you are on the side of the angels. This is war." He nodded to the two men on either side of the noblewoman. "Keep her contained to this room, I'll be back later." The two men nodded as Lucas and Jon left the room. The fight wasn't done just yet. Line break. By the end of the night, the entire garrison had either been put to the sword or taken prisoner, stripped of armor, boots and weapons before being roughly shoved into the dungeons. Of the 800 men that made up the garrison, only 100 or so survived the night. Many were nursing wounds that had put them out of the fight initially. The northern force did not get off without its own losses. 300 men were killed, along with 200 more wounded to varying degrees. The option to go without armor had been a risk that had killed many, but not enough to turn the tide for the Lannisters. The servants, as per Lucas Blackwood's orders, had been spared and herded into the kitchens during the fighting. In the morning, Lucas had addressed them, warning them of the punishment he would bring down if any were found helping the prisoners. Jon wasn't sure if Lucas would actually go as far as killing any who tried to help the imprisoned soldiers, but if the servants thought he would, then that would keep them in line all the same. Now Jon and Lucas enjoyed a meal of meat and bread that they had scrounged from the kitchens. After they had captured Lady Lefford, who was now permanently contained to her chambers, The two young men had entered the courtyard to find a large number of scuffles happening, both on the ground and on the wall. The two warriors had jumped into the fight without hesitation. Jon had cut a swath through the enemy while Lucas stayed at his back, the two working together to cut down or injure nearly 50 or more red-clad guardsmen. After the battle and the aftermath of dealing with prisoners, Lucas and Jon had gotten their food and had retired to Lord Lefford's Solar to eat and recover. Neither man had been seriously injured during the fight. "Jon," Lucas said, wiping his hands on a towel, "can I see your sword?" Jon frowned but nodded. He put down his utensils and unsheathed his sword, placing it on the desk between him and Lucas. The dark blade had already been cleaned of blood and gore. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "Where in the blazes did you get Valyrian steel?" he asked. The young noble had never actually seen the famed steel himself. No family in the Riverlands owned such a blade, but the appearance of the blade matched the descriptions his maester had taught him when he was a boy. Jon grabbed the sword and put it back in its sheath. "I found it at the wall," he said, lying easily. "Someone there gave it to me." "How'd they get it?" Lucas asked, pushing the subject. Jon shrugged. "I'm not sure," he said something about finding it in the far north. "He gave it to me because he was old and didn't want it to fall into the hands of a dishonorable man." Lucas nodded slowly. "Fair enough, you certainly can do some damage with it." Jon smiled slightly. "I had a good teacher." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come," Lucas called. The maester, an older man with salt and pepper hair, entered, a scroll in his hands. His chain was not as large as Maester Lewin's, but the man had all the common links: iron, gold, black iron, silver, and a few others. "Maester, what do you need?" Lucas asked curiously. "A message from Riverrun, my lord." The man answered gruffly. The maester had been treated well during the fight, contained to his room by a single guard, but even though maesters were supposed to be impartial, the man was not happy that the castle had been taken. "How did the rider know it was safe to enter the castle?" Jon asked. "I had a Stark banner set on the tallest tower and in front of the main gate," Lucas said. "It was Sir Bryndon's idea." Lucas took the message and dismissed the maester with a wave of his hand. When the man was gone, Lucas cracked the seal on the scroll and unrolled it, his eyes glancing over the parchment. After a moment, they widened and the young noble reread what the scroll said before setting it down on the desk beside his food. "Hoster Tully is dead," he said gravely. Jon raised an eyebrow. "How'd it happen?" "Went to bed one night, didn't wake up the next morning," Lucas answered, glancing once more at the message. "Can't say I'm too surprised. He was an old man." Jon didn't speak. He had never met the man, and didn't feel it was his place to comment about the late Lord of Riverrun. He did feel sorry for Lady Stark, who now lost her father, not long after losing her husband too. Not to mention the fact that neither Robb nor Sir Bryndon nor Edmure were at the castle to console her. "I'll send a rider out to Sir Bryndon tonight," Lucas went on. "He will need to get back to Riverrun fast." "Letters should be prepared for the other lords as well," Jon commented. "Bolton, the Great John, Karstark, they all fought with the man in both rebellions." "Good idea. I'll have those prepared as well," Lucas said. "We'll both ride out in the morning and meet with Sir Bryndon. While he, my father, and others head back to Riverrun, you and I could lead the cavalry back to Riverrun." Jon nodded slightly. "Let's see what the Blackfish has to say," he offered. "When we return to Riverrun, I'll try to send a raven to Robb." "Do you think he's still treating with Renly?" Lucas asked. Jon shook his head. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I'll send the raven to Highgarden. From there it can be brought to him by rider. That's how I got him a message when he was at the Twins from the last hearth. I sent the raven to Moat Cailin, and a messenger brought it the rest of the way." "Is it wise to tell his grace that his grandfather died?" Lucas asked curiously. "Robb should know," Jon said, shaking his head. "I'll add as well about the Battle of Oxcross." "How do you feel now that your brother is king?" Lucas asked curiously, changing the subject. "He's still Robb to me," Jon answered honestly. "The only change has been how I address him." Lucas nodded. "You keep it simple. That's smart." Jon chuckled. "Not sure about smart, but it's an easy way to live," he stated before the smile faded from his face. "Easy way to live in a hard reality." Lucas sensed Jon's mood change. "We'll beat the Lannisters soon. If King Robb and Renly come to terms, then there's nothing and nobody who can stop us." "I hope you're right," Jon said. "As long as Tywin lives, he's a threat." "Threats can be beaten." "The Rains and Tarbecks thought like that," Jon countered. So did the Targaryens, Lucas replied easily. So did the Targaryens. John X. The funeral ceremony was held at the docks, where Hoster Tully had been placed in a boat filled with dry tinder and oils. He was dressed in silver mail with a blue and red tabard bearing the leaping trout of his house on his chest. Finally, his body had been covered with a Tully banner with his longsword placed on his chest and a shield placed at his feet. The Blackfish, along with Lord Jason Mallister, pushed the boat into the current of the river and stepped back onto the dock, where Edmure stood waiting with a longbow and a flaming arrow. When the boat was far enough down the river, Edmure aimed and fired. What was supposed to be a solemn moment was shattered when Edmure's arrow missed just left of the boat. The new Lord of Riverrun quickly grabbed another arrow and lit it, aiming once more. He fired, this time sending the flaming arrow sailing well past the vessel. The crowd that had assembled to watch the funeral began to shift restlessly, as the boat began to drift towards a bend in the river, soon to be hidden from sight. Edmure tried a third time, sending the flaming arrow high into the sky. It too missed the mark, splashing into the river just short of the boat. Ser Brynden made a disgusted noise and stepped forward, roughly grabbing the bow from his nephew's hand and dragging an arrow from the sheath on his back. As he lit the arrow, he glanced up at the pennant that was flapping in the wind, noting the wind. When the arrow was lit, the Blackfish drew and fired in one fluid movement, not even watching as the arrow came arcing down onto the boat, setting it aflame. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief as the burning boat drifted around the bend, content that Hoster Tully had now been laid to rest. The aging knight tossed the longbow at his nephew as he walked by. The crowd smartly parted for the Blackfish, who stormed back towards the castle, not looking back for a second. Jon had not been part of the crowd, but had instead placed himself a few yards away from the others where he could watch the funeral happen, but no one would notice him. He was dressed respectfully in a black leather doublet over a white shirt. Ghost sat on his haunches next to Jon, also silently watching the funeral. When the crowd began to disperse, Jon stayed where he was. He was watching Lady Catelyn, who was simply staring downriver. Her only company was the silent Sir Roderick, who had become the shadow of Lady Stark. Jon truly felt for the woman. She lost her husband, now her father as well. Her eldest son was in the Reach. Her other sons were in Winterfell, and her daughters were prisoners in the capital. Her family was spread out, and none were with her. There was also the fact that according to Ser Brynden, Lady Stark had been sending almost daily messages to the Vale, begging her sister to send the Knights of the Vale to help. Messages Lady Stark's sister has yet to respond to. "I did not expect to find you here," Eddard Stark said, walking up behind Jon. He and the other members of the battle guard had traveled with the Blackfish back to Riverrun after the Battle of Oxcross. Many had wanted to stay in the Westerlands with their fathers and raid and pillage, but Ser Brynden had ordered them back to Winterfell. He wanted them whenever the king returned from the Reach. Jon glanced over his shoulder at the man before looking back at the river. "Nor did I expect to find myself here," he replied quietly. The two Northmen looked out over the river, neither saying anything. Jon had an idea of what the Karstark man was going to say, and was mentally preparing himself for the conversation. "I never grew up around bastards," Eddard began. "My mother always looked down on them because of their birth. She said that they were a symbol of dishonor. My father never agreed with her, but never disagreed with her. My brothers and I, we never knew what to think." Jon nodded slowly. "Aye, sounds about right," he said quietly. "Most don't know what to think about bastards. There's no particular stereotype. Others, well, they look down on bastards, or hate them for some reason or another." Eddard looked at Jon. "I always wondered why Lord Stark brought his bastard back to Winterfell. To have the results of his broken vow under the very same roof as his wife." He sighed. "I think I understand now. Robb saw you for more than your birth. He saw you as his brother, which he was right to. Whether you came from the same womb or not doesn't matter. The blood of House Stark runs through his veins as well as yours." Jon glanced at the Karstark warrior. "That's a good way of looking at it," he said, "but not all men are Lord Stark." Eddard nodded. "Aye, there are very few men like that." The two fell back into their silence until Eddard came up with another way to keep the conversation going. Jon didn't mind, he was patient enough to wait. There was nothing happening today, save for the feast tonight to honor the late Lord Tully. Tomorrow, the Riverlords would be sent out into the Riverlands and Westerlands to continue raiding and taking castles. "How did Lady Stark treat you?" Eddard asked finally. Jon gazed at the Lady of Winterfell, who was still standing on the docks. For just a second, their eyes met, and her tearful eyes turned to ice, just as they always had whenever she looked at him. But after a moment, she turned away and looked back at the river. The smoke from the burning boat was now fading. "I hold no ill will against Lady Stark for how she treated me," Jon said, still looking at the woman. "For all that I was, for what I represented, she never did bad by me. She never contrived to have me killed. She never drove a wedge between Robb or myself. She allowed us to be brothers. She allowed me in her own way to be a brother to all of her children." Eddard looked at Lady Stark. "I've seen the way she looks at you," he said. "I know what happened when you first arrived here. She had you sent to the dungeon." Jon nodded. "Aye, she did. But I still cannot find it within myself to hate her. For how miserable I might have been not knowing who my mother was. I cannot imagine what it must have been like for her, seeing me every day and being reminded of what her husband did." Eddard did something that Jon wasn't expecting. He chuckled. Jon looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "Something funny." Eddard shook his head, a slight smile still on his face. "You are exactly how Robb said you would be. Serious, reserved, and honorable without fault," he explained. "And if what Lucas said is right, you're a damn fine fighter." Jon grunted. "Haven't been challenged yet," he said with a slight smile. Eddard chuckled, nodding. "Aye, not wrong. We still got Tywin Bloody Lannister to deal with it." Jon nodded, the smile fading from his face. "Let's hope that all we have to deal with," he said before turning around and walking away. Line break. The feast had been uneventful for Jon, who had remained amongst the battle guard while the lords of the Riverlands shared stories about the late Hoster Tully, toasting to him whenever the mood took them. Lady Catelyn sat in the middle of the table, with her brother and uncle on either side of her. She ate little and didn't speak much, offering a small smile and a few words whenever needed. She was the picture of a perfect lady and a grieving daughter. She wore all black and had a handkerchief balled up in one hand while the other pushed food around on her plate. She didn't stay at the feast long. After yet another war story of her father during the last Blackfyre Rebellion, she had taken her leave from her late father's bannermen, thanking them for being at her father's funeral. Several offered to walk her back to her room, but she declined them all as the bulky form of Ser Roderick was instantly at her side. Jon didn't stay long himself, just long enough to eat and drink, before he excused himself. Jon had thought that he was going back to his room, but he instead found himself in the Godswood, staring at the heart tree and the sad, terrified face that had been carved on it, red sap dripping from the mouth and eyes. The woods did not have the feeling that those in Winterfell had, but it was the closest Jon felt to being home since he had crossed the neck. For some reason, Jon couldn't seem to be proud of himself. It was a weird thought. He had traveled across the largest kingdom in all of Westeros, to be at his brother's side. He fought under the Stark banner at Oxcross, and played a major part in taking the Golden Tooth. He had earned the respect of both the Northern Lords and the Lords of the Riverlands, as well as the respect from the other members of Robb's battle guard. But for some reason Jon kept feeling like he had more to prove himself. Now that he knew who his father was, he felt like he had to work that much harder to rise above his real father's tainted legacy as well as his bastard name. Not for the first time, Jon wished that Sam was still with him. He would know how to cheer Jon up. The large lad always had a way with words and would be able to help Jon get his thoughts in order. "I thought I might find you here," a voice said from behind Jon, catching him off guard. Jon turned, a hand falling to his sword before he stopped. Regarding Jon with her hands folded in front of her and a sad, firm look, was Lady Catelyn Stark, the woman he had actively tried to steer clear of. Jon bowed. "Forgive me, my lady. I will take my leave," he said immediately. But Catelyn held up a hand to stop him. "There's no need for that, Jon," she said. "I will say what I have come here to say, and then you may go." Jon didn't know what he could say, so he simply nodded. Lady Catelyn took a seat on a convenient bench, pulling her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders. Jon remained standing awkwardly, his hands behind his back like a servant. "I have never liked you," she said quietly. "I never could bring myself to. You represented to me that there was another woman out there who my Ned, loved as much as me." Jon went pale. "My lady," he stuttered, but Catelyn interrupted him. "Do not speak," she said firmly. "I also had my fears that you would try to take Robb's place as heir to Winterfell, or that Ned would name you his heir over my son. May the Seven forgive me, but I allowed my fears to control me whenever I saw you. It didn't help that you looked like my husband far more than many of the children I gave him did. Jon went to apologize once more, then quickly closed his mouth as Lady Stark held up a hand to stop him. I have now lost all three of the men I loved more than anything. The first was Brandon, my wild wolf, then my sweet, dear Ned. We were strangers when we first met, newlyweds who were never meant to be together, but we made it work, and our love grew over the years, as did our family. Finally, there was my father, a man who had always been a pillar of strength and wisdom, I saw crumble and die before my very eyes. When Lady Stark said this, she began to cry softly, tears gently rolling down her cheeks. Jon shifted uncomfortably where he stood, not feeling like he was the best person for Lady Stark to be talking to. Lady Stark, I am very sorry for your losses, but why are you telling me this? Catelyn pulled herself together, sniffing lightly as she looked at Jon with red-rimmed eyes. I miss my home, Jon Snow. I miss Winterfell and Bran and Rickon. Robb does not need me anymore. He has grown up faster than I could realize, becoming a lord and then a king. I can no longer be by his side as much as I wish I could be. He is his own man, and I being here only holds him back from being so. Catelyn stood up, walking towards Jon till she was just a foot away from him. She looked him right in the eye, forcing him to meet her gaze. Jon Snow, as Lady of Winterfell, I command you to protect my son. Jon raised an eyebrow. Of course, he began, but Lady Stark shook her head firmly. I understand that you fully intend to do so, but that is not enough for me. You say you are his brother, and I know he treats you as such. I want you to swear to me this. Jon Snow, if his life is ever in danger, you will give your life for his without hesitation. That, if he should ever go down a path that will lead to destruction, you must be the one to pull him back and save him from himself. If my son is dying, then I want you to swear to me that you will do everything in your power and more to make sure that he survives, and avenge his death if you are unable. Jon stood there for a moment before slowly drawing his sword, placing it point down in front of him. He knelt before Lady Stark, bowing his head. I swear on my honor and my life that I will always and forever do everything in my power to protect and defend my brother and king, Robb Stark. Jon vowed. Lady Catelyn looked down at Jon, nodding slightly. I leave my son in your hands, Jon Snow. If he dies because of you, then I shall hunt you through the seven hells and get my revenge, she promised. Goodbye, Jon. With that, Lady Stark swept out of the gardens, leaving a very bewildered and newly purposed Jon. Theon crossed his arms as he looked down at the island from the balcony of his room, his gaze directed at the town of Lordsport, where the Iron Fleet was assembling in full for the first time since the Greyjoy Rebellion. 150 ships, most of which were 3 times larger than the standard longship. They were not as big as the drawmans and war galleys that made up the Red Wine Fleet, or the Royal Fleet, but they were capable ships that were fast and mobile, perfect for the Ironborn way of fighting and raiding. The Iron Fleet had once a glorious sight to Theon, who remembered watching the fleet sail off at the start of his father's failed rebellion. He remembered looking at the fleet and wondering how anyone would be able to stand against such a force. Then he had learned about the fleet's destruction off Fair Isle, but he was too young to know the implications of the event. Then, when he had seen the combined might of the North, Stormlands, and Westerlands just outside the castle, he knew that he was seeing a truly unstoppable force. He still remembered the sound of the non-stop artillery battering down the walls. There was an uneasy feeling in Theon's stomach that had been bothering him ever since he left his father's solar, after the first meeting between his father and him. Theon had pledged himself to his father's cause, not too long after swearing his loyalty to Robb. It weighed on him how easily his father had broken him. For just a moment during that final fight with his father, he had been tempted to walk out of the solar and not stop till he reached Riverrun. But his desire to finally be accepted by his father, a desire that had been burning in him for years, reasserted itself, and he had chosen his family over the man he had called his brother. Robb's words rang in Theon's ears, to return to him if his father would not see reason. Now, in the heat of wanting to prove to his father that he was still an Ironborn, he had broken his oath to Robb. Theon was no fool. He knew that people from the north took oaths seriously, and by breaking his, Theon had branded himself a traitor and would never be able to return to Winterfell or the life he had before. Theon had gone through a small transformation to look like a true Ironborn. The armor he had worn while fighting alongside Robb in the Riverlands had been cast into the sea by his uncle, the Danfair. He now wore black iron armor, a bronze kraken now embossed proudly on his chest. A sea cloak hung off his shoulders, something many other captains including his sister wore while out at sea. To complete the change from Greenlander to Ironborn, Theon's father had given him a ship, a standard longship called Sea Bitch. It was not as large or fearsome as his sister's or uncle's ships, but Balon had said that Theon had not proven himself worthy to lead such a vessel. "You look angry," a voice said from behind Theon. Asha leaned against the doorway to Theon's room, a slight smirk playing on her lips as she looked at her brother. The two siblings hadn't had many chances to talk, not since their first interaction in Balon's Solar, but that was mainly Theon's doing. His sister's and father's words still grated on him more than he wanted to admit. "I'm not," Theon said, looking back out at the sea. "What do you want?" Asha frowned. "Is that how you talk to your sister you haven't seen in over a decade?" "You have no right to ask that," he growled. "Your welcome wasn't exactly the best either." Asha sighed. "I'm sorry," she said, sounding genuinely remorseful. "I was just having a little fun, Theon." Theon scoffed. "Fun? Humiliating me in front of the father and uncle I hadn't seen in years is your idea of fun?" Asha let him have that. "Look," I said I was sorry. "What else do you want from me?" Theon didn't hesitate. "Your absence." Asha shook her head. "You're going to have to get over it sometime, brother," she said angrily. "After all these years you still are that young boy who left." The Theon rounded on his sister, gripping his sword. "Left?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "I was taken. I did not have a choice. I didn't even know what was happening. I was a boy amongst wolves." Asha was surprised by the fire in her brother's eyes. When he had first arrived he looked like a Greenlander. He was dressed in pretty armor and fine clothes, and had a nice sword at his side. Asha, as was her personality, immediately pointed the fact out, and made a joke, not meaning anything by it. When she had laid eyes on Theon, she was happy to see him. After the meeting in the Solar, she had gone looking for him to give him a proper welcome home, and maybe the two of them could reconnect. But she had been unable to find him. Every time after that, when she had seen him, when she had been about to go talk to him, he had left. She had no idea that her words had caused so much anger in her brother. She nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. Theon calmed down a little. "What do you want, Asha?" "Father is calling a meeting in his Solar. He is demanding that you attend," Asha said. "This about the attack on the north?" Theon asked. Asha nodded. Theon sighed. "Fine. Let's go." "Line break." "You're late," Dolan grumbled as Theon and Asha walked into the Solar. Around the table stood a few of the prominent lords of the Iron Islands. Houses Spar, Blacktide, Harlaw, Goodbrother, and Drum were represented in one way or another. Theon didn't care. He didn't know who they were, and they probably didn't care about him. "Sorry," Theon said simply, nodding to his father and then his uncle. Balon waved aside the apology. "Shut up and get over here." Theon and Asha joined the circle around the desk where a map of the north was spread out before them. Balon started the meeting, immediately giving orders and instructions like a captain to his crew. "Victorian will take a third of the fleet and sail up the Wolf Spear River and take Torrens Square. My daughter shall take another third and swing west before cutting back east towards Deepwood Motte," Balon said, barking out the orders. "Gorold Goodbrother will take the final third and sail towards the Stony Shore." "He won't make it," Theon said, interrupting his father. "Bowden Hawker will sink him and his men." Bowden Hawker was the younger brother of Lord Roland Hawker and uncle to Eric, Brandon, and Ian. The man had spent his entire life on and around ships, and had protected the western coast from Bear Island to Flint Cliffs for decades. During the Greyjoy Rebellion, the man had led the assault of Blacktide and personally slew the father of Baelor Blacktide, the current Lord of Blacktide. He was a man who had been fighting the Ironborn all his life and knew many of their tactics and fighting styles. If Balon wanted any chance at attacking the north, he had to deal with Hawker and his ship, the Seahawk, a mighty war galley twice the size of the largest longship in the Iron Fleet. It had a small maneuverable catapult on the prow, along with 6 scorpions, 2 on either side of the stern at midship and the bow. The ship also sported a bronze-plated ram and was manned by a crew of highly skilled sailors and warriors. The Western Fleet was the smallest of the 4 great fleets in Westeros. Made up of 25 war galleys and 75 longships, It was a third the size of the Iron Fleet and half the size of both the Red Wine Fleet and the Royal Fleet, but it was led by a capable commander who knew Ironborn tactics, and the ships were manned by hardy northern sailors. They would be more than a match for the Iron Fleet if the two went toe-to-toe on the waves. Balin glared at his son, who attempted to return the gaze but failed. The message from father to son was clear: do not challenge me again. I know that, boy, Theon snapped. Now shut up and listen. Gorold will take the final third and attack Hawker and draw him south. By this time, Victarion will have reached the river and Asha will be able to slip behind the man and round Sea Dragon Point. He snarled. Now for my son, you will take Bear Island and strip it of anything of use. The Damfair and Dagmar Cleftjaw will go with you to ensure you don't screw up. Theon frowned. Bear Island has nothing, father. There's nothing on the island except for salted meat and fucking bears. It's a pointless raid. I would be better suited helping Asha take Deepwood Mate. Balin once again turned his glare on his son. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously low, daring Theon to question him again. That's twice you've challenged my authority, boy. Do so again at your peril. You will do as I say. I am your king. Balin snarled. Balin had been officially crowned king of the Iron Islands a few days ago under the bones of the Grey King's Hall, just as he had when he had raised his banners in rebellion against Robert Baratheon and the Iron Throne. Once again, a crown of driftwood was atop Balin Greyjoy's head. Theon nodded. Yes, father. Reader, Balin snapped. You shall assist my daughter. The Lord of Harlaw crossed his arms. He was an average-looking man with brown hair and a well-trimmed beard. He was dressed in sailing leathers with a sword at his side. He was the only man who didn't look pleased to be at the meeting next to Theon. What's the point of taking land away from the coast, your grace? He challenged. Torrhen Square and Deepwood are far inland. You will take them because I say you will take them, Balin growled. Theon glanced at his mother's brother, respecting him more than the others because he was the only man with the courage to speak up and against Balin. Lord Harlaw raised an eyebrow but nodded. Yes, sire. Just like that, Theon's only other ally at the table had been snuffed out and silenced. Line break. You don't sound happy with father's plan, Asha said as the siblings walked away from the meeting. It's fucking foolish. The Westerlands is ripe for the taking, and yet father decides to act like a child and attack the North out of spite. Theon growled. What a great fucking way to show Westeros how strong we are. Attacking a land where most of their men are away fighting. Asha raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerously close to treason, she warned. We are Ironborn. We don't care about the opinions of the mainlanders. If you don't like father's plan, go back to your Wolf King. Theon shook his head angrily. I'm here. I will do as father asked. He shouldn't expect me to be happy about it. It makes it worse that he's having our uncle fucking nanny me. I'm a grown man who has fought in battle before, not a babe just taken from his mother's tit. Asha stopped, turning to look at her brother. What would you have us do, Theon? Throw our lot in behind a boy king? She asked. Father would be seen as weak by his bannermen. If father wants to be king, he needs allies. Theon countered. Robb has been crowned king of both the North and the Riverlands. We couldn't ask for anything better. Asha scoffed. Robb Stark is a northern whelp who's gotten lucky, she said. He's a soft mainlander. Theon glared at his sister. Robb has the Lannisters running scared back to King's Landing. He's more of a problem for Tywin Lannister than the man with 100,000 fucking men. He's winning the damn war, and we have a chance to profit from it. But we aren't. Besides, Robb promised to allow father to be king of the Iron Islands. A crown given by another man will not make father king. We are Ironborn, brother. We take what we want through the iron price. Asha argued. But we're taking the wrong thing, Theon shot back, shouldering his way past his sister. We are giving up gold and jewels for hides and salted meat. I know. I spent the last fucking decade there. Mark my words, Asha. This won't end well for our family. Asha frowned. How do you know? She called after him. Because the Mad King fucked with the Starks. How'd that go for him? Theon called back before rounding the corner and disappearing from view, leaving a stunned Asha standing in the hallway. John leaned against the wall as the messenger addressed the council. He had ridden from the Reach, his fine green and gold tabard dirtied and rumpled from days in the saddle. Clearly the man had ridden day and night to reach Riverrun. As of right now, King Robb is resting at Bitterbridge, where the remainder of Renly Baratheon's army retired to after his death at the Grassy Vale. the man finished, rolling up the scroll. Lord Mace once again wishes to make it known that House Tyrell had nothing to do with the Northern King's injury. The Blackfish sighed and leaned forward. Is His Grace showing any signs of recovery? The man shook his head. I was sent here after your king arrived at the castle. I haven't the slightest clue what his condition is. The man answered respectfully. I have overheard that the maesters fear that he may have broken his back. He was found laying on the remains of a desk that broke under him. How did Renly die? Lord Bolton asked. The man shifted. The story is murky, my lord. The prisoners taken by Ser Loras Tyrell say that it was a shadow, while the Knight of Flowers say that it was a knife in the dark. Have you caught the assassin? Lord Lannister asked. The man shook his head. Ser Loras, commander of King Renly's Kingsguard, has placed blame on two of Renly's guards, Ser Robar Royce and Brienne of Tarth, as well as King Robb. Though when the Knight of Flowers attempted to have the king in the north arrested, others spoke in his defense, and he has been given a comfortable but guarded room in the castle. Where are King Robb's protectors? Small John? Daisy? Darren? John asked, quickly speaking up before anyone else did, preventing an argument from breaking out. The man looked towards John. When Ser Loras tried to have King Robb arrested, his companions became violent. They too were arrested and charged for protecting a murderer. The man said before hastily correcting himself. According to Ser Loras, of course. The rustle of movement went around the table as a few northern lords got to their feet angrily, hands reaching for weapons. But a word from the Blackfish stopped them. Lord Umber, Lady Mormont, stop, he barked. He raised the copy of the letter that had been given to him. We will not hurt the messenger. He had no part in your child's capture. He looked back at the messenger. I will give you a message to give to the Queen of Thorns tonight. You may stay one night here before you leave tomorrow. The rider nodded and left. When he was gone, the Great John slammed his fist on the table. We must march south and get our king back, he roared, the other northerners nodding in agreement. Honor demands it. And start a war with the Tyrells? Lord Lannister challenged. They have 5 times as many men as we do. They'd crush us. Or worse, they'd join the Lannisters. Then we'd be truly fucked. Lord Rickard shook his head. Then we'll fall back to Moat Cailin. Let's see those fuckers try and fight us then. Do not forget that we bent the knee to Robb Stark as well, Lord Bracken said angrily. We will not leave our lands undefended because you picked a fight with the wrong people. The Blackfish glanced at John, who was watching the argument with a thoughtful expression. John, you are our king's brother. What do you think? He asked, loud enough for all to hear. The bastard of Winterfell had been asked to attend the council when it had been revealed that the messenger was from the Reach. Eddard Stark was still Robb's representative, but John deserved to hear any news that might have to do with his brother. John took a step forward. Robb is tough to kill, he said firmly. I have hope that he will recover. As for Renly Baratheon, there's no way Robb had any part in that. Our father brought us up as men of honor and integrity. Robb would never kill Renly, not unless he was attacked himself. Do you believe the story that a shadow killed Renly? Eddard Stark asked. John shook his head. I don't. The story of a cutthroat assassinating Renly seems far more plausible. But again, Robb would never have done such a thing. He went south to treat with the man. Besides, my brother was injured in the attack as well. The Blackfish nodded. You make good points, lad, he grunted. I will put it in my letter to Lady Olenna, if she hasn't already thought of it already. Who's Lady Olenna? Lord Glover asked curiously. Mace Tyrell is Lord Paramount of the Reach. The Blackfish sighed. Lady Olenna is Mace Tyrell's mother. She wields more wisdom in her withered finger than her son has in his entire body. She's who we need to speak with to get this situation sorted. A few of the Riverlander lords nodded in agreement. Not many had met the Lord of Highgarden, but it was well known that he was not the smartest. The Northmen didn't care, so long as their king was returned to them. What if King Robb dies? Lord Bolton asked curiously. All eyes were drawn to the Leech Lord. It seemed almost blasphemous to even say such a thing aloud. The Starks are beloved throughout the North and the Riverlands, and bringing up the suggestion that their northern king might die was near suicidal. As always, the Great John was the first to speak. Have you lost your bloody sense, man? He growled. Robb Stark is our king. Roose nodded. Indeed he is, but he was also gravely injured, and we must be prepared for the reality that our king dies in the Reach. While the others thought on Bolton's words, John stepped in to answer. Then Bran becomes the king in the north, he said firmly. Robb had no heirs, and so his crown falls to our younger brother. But the boy is a cripple, Sir Mark Piper said offhandedly. Jon glared at the knight. That is my brother you speak about, sir. Have care, he growled. I will not have him judged on his ability to walk. Sir Mark meant nothing by the comment, Brendan said, sending his own glare at the knight from Pink Maiden. As of right now, Bran Stark is his grace's heir, but we will not place the crown on his head until we know for sure what has happened to King Robb. How do we know that the Tyrells will tell the truth? Eddard Stark asked curiously. We don't, Brendan answered, but until I see the still body of King Robb, then he is still our king and we owe our loyalty to him, he said firmly, looking around the table to make sure everyone got the message. That will be all for today, Sir Brendan said, dismissing everyone. As the council began to leave, Sir Brendan turned to Jon. Jon, moment. Jon raised an eyebrow but remained where he was by the wall. It was then he noticed that he and the Blackfish weren't alone. Sir Stefan Frey had remained where he was, looking slightly uncomfortable. Sir Stefan, what do you need? Sir Brendan asked curiously. The older knight shifted in his seat. King Robb is promised to marry my sister Roslyn. I speak on behalf of my house when I ask that we change the agreement. With Lady Stark returning north, I felt that you were best to talk to about this matter. Sir Brendan glared at the man. You are choosing the wrong time to do this, Sir Stefan. The heir to the crossing shook his head. I am afraid that I have no choice, Sir Brendan. Either I do this now, or my father will send Lothar to make the deal. Lothar Frey, or Lame Lothar, as he is also known, is the steward of the crossing and Walder Frey's right-hand man. There are many Freys that the Blackfish cannot stomach, but Lothar is one of the worst. The Blackfish cursed under his breath, but nodded. Fine. What do you have in mind? Sir Stefan put his hands together before him. With King Robb's fate unknown, I propose that Roslyn marry Lord Edmure. The man is unbetrothed at the moment, and my sister is a fine girl to marry, without any of my family's charm. Sir Brendan raised an eyebrow. Nothing else? Sir Stefan shook his head. My brother is still betrothed to Lady Arya, and both Robb and Sir Roderick have a squire. My father will no doubt send 2 boys with Lady Stark on her way back north. I will not change the contract. Jon frowned. Arya is betrothed. Stefan nodded. Indeed, King Robb chose the boy himself. They won't be married for some time, though, on account of their age. Jon was still confused about why Arya got betrothed, but he dropped the subject. He knew that his sister would never approve of being married off in such a fashion. No doubt Robb and Lady Stark made the engagement. They both knew what Arya was like. If she was truly being married off, then it had to be for a good reason. And if Robb chose the boy, then that also helped ease Jon's conscience. I will talk to my nephew about this. Send a message to your father that we are working on an agreement. Anything to keep that one-legged bastard away from Riverrun. Sir Brendan said, bringing the conversation back to Edmure. I cannot promise anything, however. Edmure is now Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, and his own man. Sir Stefan sighed and nodded. Thank you, Sir Brendan. I will send the message immediately, he promised, before also taking his leave. When the Frey Knight was gone, Sir Brendan muttered something under his breath about the family before turning his attention to Jon. The reason I asked you to stay back is because I'm curious why Kat left. I understand she spoke to you last night. She did, Jon confirmed. She told me she missed Winterfell and she missed Bran and Rickon, Jon explained, leaving out Lady Stark's admittance of hate for him. She then made me swear to protect Robb. Sir Brendan grunted. Hopefully being back around her children in Winterfell will be good for her. She's had nothing but heartbreak here. Robb's injury wouldn't have helped either, he said sadly. Jon nodded. The North will allow her to clear her head and step away from the war, he added. Then a thought came to him, a piece of information that he had forgotten about until just now when Winterfell was mentioned. Sir Brendan, have we heard anything from Theon? The Blackfish shook his head. Nothing, but I wouldn't worry. Balon Greyjoy is a stubborn, joyless cunt. I suspect we'll see Theon in the next few days. Jon nodded slowly. I hope so. Robb took a lot of fighting men south with him. The North is vast. If anywhere is attacked, then it will take time to put together reinforcements. Sir Brendan made a vague gesture. Bowden Hawker is still in the North. The man won't allow the Ironborn to attack the North. Jon sighed. I hope you're right, Sir Brendan. The knight nodded. Trust me, lad. I have a better chance at convincing my nephew to marry a Frey than Theon has convincing his father to attack a near-defenseless Westerlands. Balon Greyjoy is probably still bitter about his defeat at the hands of Ned and Robert. So what will we do now? Jon asked. The Lords of the North had returned to Riverrun after wreaking havoc in the Westerlands for the past week. The Crag Ashemark, the Golden Tooth, Deep Den and Sarsfield had all fallen to northern control. The Stark army had left the Westerlands with endless amounts of gold, land, resources, and food, giving the Lannisters a taste of what the Riverlanders were dealing with. Ser Brendan rubbed his jaw. I'll send a few lords back into the west with orders to take the northern half of the Westerlands. It'll give them something to do instead of sitting here and getting drunk and fighting amongst themselves. Why the northern half? Jon asked curiously. I don't want anyone getting ideas about taking Casterly Rock. To take Casterly Rock, we'd need the entire army and besiege it for months. We simply don't have the men to do it. Furthermore, I don't want the Tyrells thinking we're retaliating if the Reach is accidentally attacked by our men attacking the southern Westerlands. Ser Brendan explained, Baneford and Hornvale will be our prominent targets. Jon nodded. It was a good plan, keep attacking the Westerlands, with part of the army while also avoiding parts of the army being bogged down in long sieges, or accidentally attacking other factions. With your leave, Ser Brendan, I wish to write a message to Bran. He should know what has happened in case anything does happen to Robb, Jon said. Ser Brendan nodded. Good idea. I have to write that letter for Lady Olenna. I will send a raven as well to Highgarden to be safe. Let's hope Tywin Lannister doesn't hear about any of this, or we'd be well and truly fucked. Jon 12. Convincing Edmure to marry Rosalind Frey had been easier than both Jon and the Blackfish had anticipated. The new Lord of Riverrun was more than happy to have the tedious task of wife hunting taken out of his hands. It also helped that the girl was considered one of the more comely girls in the Riverlands. She was soft-spoken, sweet, without the weasel-like features that many Freys shared. It was almost surprising how easily the Blackfish was able to talk his nephew to go through with the marriage. It was almost as if his father's passing had awoken something in Edmure, a newfound sense of responsibility as Lord of Riverrun and Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. Sir Stepharon was extremely relieved to hear that Edmure had accepted the betrothal. His father's message in response to Stepharon's had been critical and abusive, stating his disbelief in his heir's ability to negotiate with House Tully. Now the knight was more than happy to tell his father that he had brokered a marriage between his sister and the new Lord Paramount of Riverrun, a position that Walder Frey had craved for one of his kin for a very long time. Lady Rosalind had arrived in Riverrun, within a few days of Edmure agreeing to the marriage, escorted by a number of her sisters and guards. Their marriage was held the next day in the Sept at Riverrun, where Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully had been wed more than 20 years ago. It was a beautiful ceremony. Stepharon had given his sister away before joining the rest of his family, who had come for the wedding. Many of the lords of the Riverlands had been present for the wedding as well, leaving the war in the Westerlands to their northern allies. Everyone was dressed in their finery, especially the soon-to-be bride and groom. Edmure wore a red and blue striped tunic with a silver trout over shining silver mail. He wore a ceremonial cloak of House Tully on his shoulders. His hair and beard had been brushed and trimmed for the wedding. He looked like a true lord of Riverrun, and held himself like one. The bride was equally as beautiful, wearing a beautiful white dress that showed off her petite size. Her hair had also been done up in an elegant braid with white flowers mixed in. A maiden cloak bearing the sigil of House Frey hung from her shoulders. There had been no time to make a traditional wedding dress that had many layers and a long train, but neither the bride nor the groom seemed to care. The simplicity of the dress made the girl even more beautiful to most present. Jon himself was dressed modestly compared to the lords and ladies present for the wedding. Garbed in a simple gray doublet, a running direwolf had been picked out in white thread on his right breast, courtesy of one of the Frey girls who had accompanied Rosalind Frey to Riverrun. In fact, the direwolf looked eerily similar to the white wolf that now sat at Jon's feet, his pelt freshly brushed till it looked like fresh snow. The wedding vows had been simple but touching. Both Edmure and Rosalind had spent a lot of time the day before the wedding trying to get to know each other more. If they were to be married, they both agreed that they didn't want to marry a total stranger. Edmure had been on his best behavior, no drinking or flirting. He had been the perfect nobleman to his new wife, much to the approval of his bannerman and uncle. Jon, even though he was not a follower of the faith of the Seven, could appreciate the wedding. It was, at its core, a promise between the couple to be honorable, faithful, and loving to one another. Per custom, Edmure had cloaked Rosalind in his cloak, promising to protect her and care for her, making the promise to both Rosalind and Sir Steffron, who acted as leader of House Frey in his father's absence. It was then that the Septon blessed the union in the light of the Seven. After the ceremony, a grand feast was held in the Great Hall, where Edmure and Rosalind sat in the center of the high table. On Edmure's right sat Sir Brynden, who was speaking quietly to Lord Mallister and Lord Blackwood. Next to Rosalind sat her brother Steffron, who entertained the new couple with a story that kept them breaking out in laughter. Around the hall, the war was briefly forgotten about, as everyone participated in the merrymaking. Dancing, drinking, and eating happened in abundance. The singers and musicians kept the music at full volume, switching occasionally from jaunty tunes to slower, more lovely ballads. Every once in a while, a noble or knight would approach the high table and present the new couple with a wedding gift. Sir Brynden had given his nephew a sword fashioned by the smiths of Qohor, who are considered some of the best smiths in the known world. In addition to the sword, he had given a thin-bladed dagger of the same quality to his new niece in Rosalind. Jonos Bracken had given the new lord and lady of Riverrun a fine pair of stallions. Tydos Blackwood had presented the couple with a weirwood longbow. Patrek and Jason Mallister promised that a new sailboat was currently being built in Seaguard. It was a small, lighter ship perfect for pleasure sailing on the rivers around Riverrun. It had been christened Rosalind after the new lady of Riverrun. Now it was Jon's turn to present a wedding present to Edmure and Rosalind, both from himself and House Stark. As Jon walked up to the table, Edmure turned to him. Grinning brightly, he broke away from his conversation with Steffron. "Jon," he said happily. Jon bowed formally in front of the table. "My lord, my lady, although I do not share the name, I wish to give a present to you on this amazing day, both from myself and from House Stark." Rosalind smiled happily. "Surely his grace will make you a Stark when he returns from the Reach." Jon's smile eased a little. "I can only continue to pray for my brother's safe return. His good health is all the reward I need for serving him," he responded politely. He pulled the gift from behind his back, placing it gently on the table. "This is an ironwood shield, crafted by the finest shield makers in the north. House Forrester of Ironrath. Ironwood is the strongest wood in all of Westeros. It will never break or shatter, not even if struck by the mountain himself. It'll be as if you have a stone wall on your arm during battle." Jon promised. Jon had sought out the Lord of Ironrath, Lord Gregor Forrester, before the man had set off with Lord Roland Hawker for the Westerlands. The man had been more than kind enough to give Jon one of the finest shields he had so that Jon could present it to Edmure. Jon had the shield painted with the banner of House Tully, the only exception being the bridge of the crossing added just under the trout. A little reminder to show where Edmure's wife hailed from. Edmure stood and fitted the shield on his left arm, moving it around. He smiled. "It's a magnificent shield," he praised. "Though I expect nothing less from my nephew's lands." Jon bowed. "I have no doubt that my brother will present a much better gift upon his return, but I hope this will suffice for the moment," he said humbly. Edmure waved aside the apology. "It's a fine gift, my friend. I am sure my new lady wife is happy that I am so well protected on the battlefield." Jon smiled and bowed once again before returning to his seat, the other members of the battle guard patting him on the back for his gift and the way he handled himself, acting in his brother's place. After more gifts were presented and food was eaten, Patrick Mallister stood up, rather shakily on account of how much ale and wine he had consumed. He raised his chalice to his old friend. "To the bride and groom, every sword needs a sheath," he cried happily, declaring the time-honored tradition of the bedding ceremony. The crowd cheered as both Edmure and Rosalind grew red with embarrassment. The couple was rushed by the crowd as the bedding ceremony started. Rosalind was dragged away by the men while Edmure was equally pulled away by the women. Jon stayed where he was, watching the event with amusement. It was times like these where the bastard of Winterfell wasn't so sad that he wasn't a noble. He avoided embarrassing traditions like the bedding ceremony. The other members of the battle guard had joined in on the ceremony, leaving Jon alone at the table, but his loneliness didn't last long. Sir Brynden grunted as he took a seat next to Jon. "Not one of the worst feasts I've been to," he said, sounding more like he was talking to himself rather than Jon. "That honor belongs to my brother's wedding to Manisa went. I was happy for Hoster, Nanisa was a pretty girl from a good family, but I was less pleased with the constant line of women he kept lining up for me to meet. Jon smiled slightly. I think that's one of the bright spots of my life. I will never have to deal with being set up with a total stranger. Ser Brynden chuckled. Aye, there's that. He agreed. You did a good thing giving that shield to Edmure, offering it as a gift from House Stark and yourself. Jon shook his head. I would give more thanks to Lord Forrester. He was generous enough to give me the shield to gift to Lord Edmure, he said. But your gift was quite amazing. A sword from Qohor must be expensive. Brynden smiled slightly. Not as good as Valyrian steel, he said, glancing down at Jon's sword. He laughed when he saw Jon's face. I noticed it during the Battle of Oxcross. Don't forget, I fought the entirety of Robert's Rebellion and the Greyjoy Rebellion with Ned Stark. I know Valyrian steel when I see it. Now the question remains. Where did you get it? Jon grimaced. I got it from a man when I was at the wall. He was an older man who didn't want the sword to fall into the wrong hands. I guess he gave it to me because Lord Stark's my father. Ser Brynden frowned. A random man gave it to you. The Maester. Jon specified, a little reluctant to give up the fact. The Maester at Castle Black gave it to me. Aemon Targaryen gave you the sword? Ser Brynden asked curiously. Jon frowned. How'd you know the Maester was a Targaryen? The Blackfish made a vague gesture with his hand. Robert wanted all Targaryens dead at the end of his rebellion. I remember Jon Arryn mentioning that Aemon was a Maester at the wall, and was untouchable, he responded. I didn't know the man had a Valyrian steel sword. Jon nodded, neither did I. Did he ever tell you how he got it? Ser Brynden asked. Jon hesitated for a moment before answering. My friend Sam is very interested in history. He believes that this is Dark Sister. Ser Brynden's usually serious face broke for just a second, as he looked shocked for the first time since Jon had met him. He looked down again at the sword, noting the steel crossguard and pommel. How'd he come to that conclusion? He asked. Jon shrugged. The last person to wield the sword was Bloodraven, who disappeared north of the wall at the end of his life. Sam assumed that he left the sword with Maester Aemon, he said. I had the hilt and pommel changed to make it less recognizable. Ser Brynden nodded, overcoming his shock. Probably for the best, he grunted. I wonder if he gave you the sword to make up for his family's crimes against yours. It makes sense, but I'm not a full Stark, Jon pointed out. But that's as good a guess as Sam and I could come up with. The Blackfish shook his head. The son of Randyll Bloody Tarly being a bookish boy who'd rather read than fight is still a puzzling thought, he said. Where'd he bugger off to? Sam went to study at the Citadel, Jon said. I've never seen him more alive than when he had all night to himself in the library at Winterfell, Jon said with a laugh. The Blackfish chuckled as well, then the smile began to fade from his face. I didn't want to tell you this, but I overheard a couple of the younger Northerners talking about Robb. If he were to die in the Reach, they said they wouldn't mind having you take up the crown. Jon nearly choked on his ale. He looked in alarm at the Tully Knight. Me? He asked. I'm a bastard. The crown goes to Bran. That's the law. Ser Brynden nodded. You're correct, and I'm not forcing you to take the crown. I wish, just as you do, that Robb recovers and makes his way back north. But I couldn't help but think about it. You're not a power-hungry man. You're honorable, responsible, good with a sword. You're not afraid to fight on the front lines just like your brother, he said. I'm not saying you have to be king, but we both know Bran wouldn't be able to lead the army, even if he had the use of his legs. You'd have to lead in his absence, as his representative, so to speak. Jon frowned. As his representative. He agreed. But I would never wear the crown. That goes from Robb to Bran. I do not want it. Ser Brynden raised an eyebrow, surprised with how vehemently Jon was protesting. He raised a hand to calm the young man. I understand, lad, no one is forcing you to do so, but realize that more and more people might begin to look to you for leadership. You might be the closest thing to Robb that we have left. You do know him better than most. You'd know how he would act, what he might say. But I'm not the strategist Robb is, Jon countered. The Blackfish nodded. True, Robb has a special talent for strategy that is truly marvelous to watch. But you are better with a sword, I'd wager. Lucas told me how you fought at the Golden Tooth. He added, but just keep that in mind. With Robb's life up in the air, others will begin to look to you for guidance. If you truly do not want the crown, and I believe you when you say you don't, then I'd advise you to be careful with how you proceed from here. Like it or not, there's a power opening that needs to be filled until Robb's fate is determined, and it will only grow larger the longer we are without the king. I will do my best to keep it contained, but be careful, lest you get sucked in accidentally. Jon nodded. Thank you, Sir Brynden. I will keep your words in mind. The Blackfish grunted as he stood up. We're in troubled times, Jon Snow. Men will be tested and tempted like never before. Make sure to keep your feet. Life has a fine way of fucking you over. And with that, the Blackfish left, leaving Jon alone to ponder his words.